Okay, so you should see that we're recording. And the reason why we wanted to invite EdReports to come and chat with us is because EdReports is a very valuable resource that we can use to make decisions about curriculum and textbook adoption. And it is that time of the year. And what I love about the title that they picked this morning, What You Choose Matters, is just yesterday we had an Iowa Core advocate webinar about rigor, and the amount of rigor in your classroom is so dependent on the materials that you are using. So when I saw the title of the webinar, I was like, yay, this is like just fitting in perfectly. So EdReports I know of through SCAS and through my different interactions, and I would go to them and I would share their information with some of you. And one of the things I realized is I was not using it efficiently and effectively. And so I said, I wonder if I'm not doing it, if others might not be using it efficiently and effectively also. So I reached out to EdReports, who is one of the partners of SCAS, and I said, would you all consider coaching us up a bit? So that's why we're together this morning. And I thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules because, to learn about this, because I know your time is precious. So without any more chit chat from me, I'm going to turn it over to Shanna and Tim, and I will monitor the chat so I can give yourself an introduction. And also any questions that come up, because we will have a Q&A time, just go ahead and put those in the chat, and then I'll kind of facilitate that at the end. So Shannon and Tim, you can take it away. You should be able to unmute yourselves.
I did. I unmuted myself. Thank you. Good morning. I am Shanna Estep. I am the outreach specialist for EdReports, and I'm joined by Tim. Tim, are you going to say good morning?
Good morning, everyone. This is Tim Truitt.
Yes, good morning. I don't know what your weather's like there. It's cloudy and gray here on the West Coast. I'm in California, so very wet and misty, but I know it's not as bad as some of you have the weather right now. So I really do appreciate you joining us this morning, and I'm glad you're warm and cozy in your offices or your homes or wherever you are. So we'll go ahead and get started. April, if you want to advance for me. And are you going to show the slideshow, or are you just going to advance with the slides on the side?
I was just gonna advance if that was okay, or
Sure.
I can go to full presentation. Does this look okay?
Oh, looks fine to me.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So I would want you to just take a moment and think about what's happening in your district. So if you can choose from one of these four, or you can make a fifth if you'd like. Have you already selected materials and you're fully into implementing them? Have you written your own materials and that's what schools in your district are using? Are teachers kind of piecing together materials from various sources? Perhaps you have some old units of study or an old textbook or a couple of things that have been downloaded, Engage NY, those kinds of things. Or are you not really sure? And I would love to just take a few minutes, and if you can put your answers in the chat box, or if somebody wants to unmute and talk a little bit about what's happening in your district, just to get a sense of what's going on out there. Number 3, teachers are piecing together. I think that seems to be that's a norm right now, where folks are trying to a combo of 1 and 3. So there have been some things that have been selected, and but teachers are still piecing together from various sources. Well, I'm going to share some research. There's been a ton of research recently about curriculum materials. So I'm going to share a little bit of research with you today. If there is anyone who would like some additional research or links or something to help bolster a conversation you're having with your schools, I'd be happy to provide that as well. So April, you want to go to the next slide? One of the biggest pieces of research that we've been reading lately. It comes from Chingos and Whitehurst. They did a large study about instructional materials and teachers and the influence they have on students and student achievement. And I think I really love this graphic because it really speaks to what's happening in the classroom, that it's really this collaboration between teacher, student, and the materials they're using. So they found that that students are most influenced by their teacher, of course, and then the materials those teachers are using. And so I'll share the next slide. This is from a study from a 2015 study, but William Schmidt quoted this in 2013. As it stands now, students' chances to learn challenging content depends on whether they are lucky enough to attend a school that provides it. So I think this is one of the reasons why what we choose matters to kids. It also matters to teachers. There's a lot of research recently been done around professional learning linked directly to curriculum materials. So the next slide points out some of the things that are affected by the choices we make from the materials we're using. Not only does it inform assessment strategies, I think a big one that we often forget is it affects how parents engage with their students, their kids, and their teachers as well. It affects how teachers spend their PLC time or their grade level time. And then again, also the kind of professional development teachers receive. So materials have a much more far-reaching effect than oftentimes we think about. Next slide. Deborah Ball is of course ahead of her time. This is from a research study that was done in 1996, but basically saying that curriculum materials are obviously out there in the world. They're already scaled up as part of a regular routine of schools, and that professional learning should be tied to those materials that teachers are using. So one of the things that we found in slide 8, one of the things that we found when we first entered the field in 2015, because we've been around since 2015, was a market that was flooded with Common Core aligned stickers on books that have been really specifically written for states that really had not been realigned to the Common Core standards. Lots of new materials that claim to understand the standards, honestly, but had little understanding yet and alignment to the true meaning. The other thing we found is schools that were desperate for materials, teachers who were crying out, needing something to teach these new standards, understand the standards better, and knowing that what was out there just wasn't cutting it. And then honestly, being frustrated by the lack of good, strong materials. So we entered the market. Next slide, please. We entered the market with the idea that if we help the field identify what good materials are out there, that by doing that, we would increase the demand for better materials, which would improve the materials, and then really honestly provide better outcomes for kids. So we formed an organization, very small. We're very small. Tim actually, I'm going to turn this over to Tim right here. Tim, you can talk a little bit about how you began with EdReports, and then what we do and how we do it.
All right. Thanks, Shanna. Again, my name is Tim Truitt. As the title at the beginning said, or the slide at the beginning said, my title is High School Math Content Specialist. However, to Shanna's point about getting started with EdReports, I started out as a K-8 reviewer and also helped write the K-8 tool or create the tool that is used for K-8 reviews. And at that time, I was working for a school district in Louisville, Kentucky, as their district specialist for mathematics grades 6 through 12. And when I came on to EdReports full-time in 2015, I came on as the high school specialist and was working on the high school tool and have sort of been leading the high school reviews since then, and continuing to help with the K-8 reviews. So as we move to slide 10, I'm going to take just a few minutes and talk about our process up front, and then get into what our tools look at. And that will sort of wind up going back to where April this morning started out the webinar by talking about rigor and looking for rigor in materials. That'll sort of be where I end up over the next few minutes. So when we review, we put together teams of 5 practicing educators. 4 of those reviewers are actually in the materials on a weekly basis, some on a daily basis. The 5th person in the group is a writer, and they're responsible for writing the reports. Our reviewers come from all across the country and from different levels. Classroom teachers, district administrators, state level folks like April. And these are people who have taught, could have taught multiple grade levels, or at the high school, from the high school perspective, multiple courses, special education teachers, regular education teachers, new teachers, teachers that have been in for 30, 35 years. And even at the high school level, we do have some university professors in math education departments who serve as reviewers for our reports. And when all is said and done, that team of 5 will put in over 150 hours of reviewing and scoring and conversation. And that's before we kind of get to the final stages of copy editing and calibrating reports and getting them on our website. So as we move on to the next slide, again, the reviewers get the materials. They examine the instructional materials independently at first, and we use a system of Google Docs and Google folders for them to be able to enter evidence. After reviewers have independently reviewed on a weekly basis, they then come together and calibrate on the evidence that has been collected, determine if they need to go back and review any evidence or add evidence, and come to a consensus score. They do that at the end for a week, and then they sort of move on and keep doing that on a weekly basis. Evidence collection, calibration, scoring, moving on to the next. The reviews do take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. I'll talk a little bit more about our gateway system in just a second, but the length of the review depends on, in honesty, how well the materials are doing. The better the materials are scoring in our gateways, they move from gateway 1 to gateway 2, and that, of course, that's what adds the time. And then at the end of the process, we do share the reports with the publishers of the materials, and we enter into it. They have an opportunity to write a piece on background information that gets posted with the review, with the report on our website. They also have a chance to write a response to the report, but we do not. But again, that's a conversation, just an opportunity for the publishers to better understand the reports. Ultimately, we are the decision makers around, and the practicing educators that have been reviewing the materials are ultimately the decision makers as to what stays in the report or what gets moved, and ultimately what goes on the website. So when you look at our website on slide 12, and I know I'm not going to linger on this very long because I know at the end we're going to have some Q&A, and I also know April is ready to dive into the website and let you see things. But you kind of get hit with a lot of information at first. And I will say that we've constantly working to improve how our website looks and make it as usable as possible for folks wanting to find the information. But for K-8, you see individual grade level reports that are just Gateway 1. when you're initially looking at K-8, and there's tabs at the top of the page that April will get into in a little bit, that you have to go from Gateway 1 to Gateway 2 to Gateway 3. And again, that's because for K-8, we write grade level reports. Each grade gets a report. At high school, we write a report for the series, so there aren't as many colored dots that we have to deal with when displaying them on our website. And then next, as we move along past sort of, that's the high level look. As we dive a little farther into the website, April, if you'll continue on to, thank you very much. We go from sort of a high level look with colored dots and thermometers to pretty quickly getting into narrative reports about the series. And we go through gateway by gateway, indicator by indicator, writing extensive evidence for all of the indicators that are in the report, and continuing on. So that's a little bit about the process. To date, we've written, and you might have noticed in looking at the slides that we're not just math. I know we're math focused today. We are currently not only K-12 math, but also K-12 English Language Arts. And we're actually starting into the world of science. We're going to start with middle school science reviews in just a couple of months. So we are expanding content areas that we review. We have currently done about 340 reports for K-12 math and ELA, again, all across the country, being used by classroom teachers, districts, state levels. And we have, I talked about there's an opportunity for publishers to post a background piece and also a response. And we have had publishers, a wide array of responses to our reports, but we have had publishers who have changed language around marketing on their websites. We've had publishers who have revised materials in 1 or 2 weeks, so in order to sort of make changes before a report goes public. And we've had publishers, in essence, the report goes live, but they're sort of beginning to rewrite substantial sections of their materials based on our reports. So not only a lot of use and response from educators in the field, but also from the publishing companies. And we're, of course, branching out into open educational resources for both math and English language arts. Some of the reports that are going, that most recently have come out for mathematics, Zern, Agile Mind for middle school, Jump Math for grades K through 8, the Utah Middle School Math Project, and then a couple of high school reports, Mathematics Vision Project, which is open educational resource, as well as Agile Mind, not only middle school, but also high school mathematics. That's based from the Dana Center in Texas. So what's in our tools? This is sort of where the rubber really meets the road. What are we looking for when we review in slide 16? Of course, we base our reports on the Common Core state standards for mathematics. And we recognize and have certainly kept up with across the country as changes have, as states have modified or made changes to standards. We've certainly kept up with that. And we also recognize that some publishers have state-specific materials that they really produce. At this point, we continue to, again, to base our standards on the Common Core state standards for mathematics as they were published in 2011, 2012, and went into practice. And we also focus on the instructional shifts that sort of grew out of the Common Core state standards for mathematics. So for both K-8 math and high school, our Gateway 1 focuses or addresses focus and coherence. We don't do those things in exactly the same way for the separate tools, but Gateway 1 does address focus and coherence. In Gateway 2, we focus on rigor and the mathematical practices. And in Gateway 3, we have 5 different categories of indicators of usability and instructional supports. We do, again, you sort of saw with the colored balls on the couple of slides ago, that we do have green is a color that we talk about with meeting alignment criteria. Yellow is partially meet. Red is does not meet. However, I want to emphasize, and can't say this enough, that not all greens are created equal. Not all yellows are created equal. Not all reds are created equal. That's just a coloring system that we have with our scoring. A series that is green may not be the best choice for a district or a school. A series that yellow that might have a few holes here and there could actually be a better fit. So again, we are working to just provide information to schools and districts to help them be able to make the best choice or in the conversation. So in another level, moving on to the next slide. So we look at, when we talk about alignment to the Common Core state standards, we're talking about our scores for Gateways 1 and 2. So the scoring that you see on the slide currently is from our K-8 tool. There are 14 points that a series could score for focus and coherence. There are 18 points that could be scored for rigor and the mathematical practices. Again, that's specific to K-8. High school is a little bit different. But we start out looking at alignment, looking at those 4 pieces in Gateways 1 and 2 of focus, coherence, rigor, and the mathematical practices. And moving on. Thank you, April. So in focus, and I know the print might be a little small. In focus, we talk about, and this is where I'll kind of really get into what each of those 4 pieces is looking at. Focus, we look at, do the materials assess grade level standards, and do they spend a majority of time on the major work of the grade? So again, when we talk about major work, we often, it's a part of our tool. There is a table in our tool that April will make sure she hits in a little bit. But there, we sort of focus on what's been indicated in the standards, but also from student achievement partners. They talk about where to focus. It also sort of falls in line with what some of the assessment consortia had, the PARC and Smarter Balanced assessment groups had, as to what they define as major work of the grade. For coherence, we're looking for connections between standards and clusters. We also look at are students getting enough opportunities to learn the standards of the grade. And we look for connections not only within the grade level, but across grade levels as well. So sort of the coherence, we're trying to look within the grade level and across the grade levels, and is what's in there viable for one school year. For rigor, that's where we talk about the development of conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and application. And we also look for balance within rigor, that they're not doing each of those aspects separately, or they're not doing them together. So again, that's sort of getting back to what April was saying earlier when we started, looking for rigor in the materials. And we also talk about the mathematical practices. Not only are they in the materials, but are teachers getting help in implementing the practices in their classroom? Do the materials identify the practices in their lessons and chapters? And do they fully attend to the meaning of each practice standard and not just bits and pieces of those things? So I'd like to, so I know that's a lot of me talking, and a lot of the times in webinar fashion, it can sort of be hard to catch everything. So I'd love to just sort of pause if there's any questions that anybody wants to type in the chat box at this point. Maybe there's something you're wondering if we talk about it in our tool that I didn't mention, or you would like just a little further in-depth question. So I'm just going to pause for a second and see if any questions pop up.
And Tim, this is Shanna. I also wanted to point out that here on this slide, this is so you can get an idea of the level of detail in each of the reports. Some of you in your work, you mostly care about the gateway summary or the shift summary. We get all the way down to very detailed indicator evidence that lists unit numbers, page numbers, chapter numbers. Some of you in your work may want to get to that detail. So when April goes to the website, we'll kind of point some of that out so you can see the different levels of information that are there that can really support the work that you're doing with your schools.
I didn't see any questions pop up just yet, but one thing that I really like that you honor is the shifts, because we know how important that is to implementing the standards, and how we don't have to be worried that this isn't in alignment with resources we may already be using from student achievement partners that are focused on the major works, the major clusters, and the alignments to Smarter, Balanced, and Park, because all of those resources are linked and some of us may be using them. So that's reassuring to know that that is your system and that's being honored. We did have a question, more explanation on how green isn't necessarily the best fit for a district. And I think that goes back to the comment that was made about not all greens are created equal.
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. And so, of course, one thing we do when we look at materials, as April just reinforced, we're looking for how the materials address the shifts and the standards of the grade level. But we know that there can be different ways to do that. Some series might take more of a problem-oriented or problem-based approach. Some series might have, more scaffolding and be a little bit more, they can still, more teacher-directed or teacher-centered. And so when we're reviewing, it's not really until in Gateway 3, we talk about the teacher supports and what's provided to teachers, how the materials handle differentiation. But in Gateways 1 and 2, we try to we're not commenting on pedagogy, how the materials might do these things. So that one thing we talk a lot about with schools or districts is, as they're thinking about using our reports in adoption or adaptions, if that's what's needed, is to really think about where the teachers currently are and think about how the materials that get selected might cause a shift in what they do, and thinking about, is it going to be a dramatic shift or maybe a minor shift? So that's when I talk about not all greens are equal, and how a green, just because something green doesn't mean it might. If the teachers that have been very are used to sort of a traditional approach towards mathematics, then moving all the way to something that's completely problem-based and inquiry-centered might be a big shift that sort of derails implementation before it even gets started. So that's sort of what I mean by not all greens are created equal, or a green may not be the best.
Okay, Tim, we had another question. You mentioned a scoring rubric of 18 points for coherence. Is that on the website someplace, that rubric?
It is.
So
I'm so sorry I jumped in. I apologize.
that's a good. All of our tools, not only all of our tools for K-8 and ELA, but also the evidence guides that we provide to our reviewers, those are all on our website. And so that can certainly be something in a moment when we transition over to that, April, we can show where everything is. That has the scoring, the tool has the overall scoring and what's needed to go from one gateway to the next. The evidence guides have the individual scoring criteria for each indicator. So all of that is on our website at edreports.org. And I think we have a plan to look at that today.
Great. So I think you already talked about this question, but what is the criteria for the review list? I think we're going to get to that on the website. And then what is the process of to get something on the review list? Like if a district's using something and they want that to be reviewed and it hasn't been reviewed, what should they do?
So when we initially started, we looked across the country and we looked at what was currently on state adoption lists. And this is going back to 2014. We looked at what was on the adoption list for states at that time. We also had market research done and looked at those materials which took up the greatest percentage of market share. Over the last 3 years, as we've gone through those materials that were on the state adoption list and were the biggest market share, and as materials have revised and put out new editions, we're now very much to a point where, we're certainly looking for, we are always taking recommendations from schools, school districts, states as to what they would like to see reviewed. And we certainly keep an eye out for new editions of materials, but we also very much look for questions from the field or recommendations from the field. And so that you can just contact us. Again, that's within our website. There's a place to contact us and send in questions about or recommendations or requests for reviewing materials. I will say at this time we are still reviewing. We focus on year-long instructional materials, but we are working to get into supplemental materials. So you can send those in, and that's just another way that helps reinforce the need for reviews of supplemental materials and how they are being used across the country, and sort of helps. When I talked about market research before, that sort of helps add into that market research of, hey, we're using this here in Iowa, and then we get 10 other requests for the same thing from 10 other states. And it becomes very easy for us then to see that, yeah, this is something that we need to look at for all schools and districts across the country.
That's it for our questions. So I think we're getting to the point where maybe we can go ahead and move on. I don't see anything else in the chat.
I think so. And April, maybe we want to jump into the website right now instead of waiting to the end. That would be great. And then if you'd like to, April, yep. So I've just, at the top of the homepage, you'll see Math, ELA, Resources, About, and News. So I will point you first to the Math section, but I do want to show you the other tabs as well, because some of the things that Tim alluded to will be found in those areas. So when you go to View Math Reports, you'll land on a page that looks like this. Across the tabs there, and yep, there we go. We'll have K-8 math materials, high school math materials, and then the materials that are currently under review. So let's go to the K-8 materials. And this will look familiar with the dots. You scroll a little farther down and you can see focus and coherence is bolded at the top there. So what you're seeing here are the scores for these grade levels in Gateway 1, focus and coherence. So you can see Bridges, which is third down, in second grade, scored 13 out of 14 points in focus and coherence. If you go to rigor and math practices, you can see that they scored 17 out of 18 points in the math practices. And because they were reviewed and met expectations for gateways 1 and 2, we looked at usability. So, and they scored 37 out of 38 points. If you go back to focus and coherence, and we'll just go above, we'll go to big ideas. Actually, let's go to, let's take a look at Carnegie 8th grade. So you can see that Carnegie 8th grade scored 9 out of 14 points for Gateway 1. If you go to rigor and math practices, you'll see that the 2 grade levels before them are, it says NR, not reviewed, because they did not meet the expectations of Gateway 1, so we did not review them for Gateway 2. But 8th grade did get reviewed for Gateway 2 and scored 12 out of 18 points. So let's go to usability, and you'll see that there is no score or not reviewed because it did not meet up expectations for Gateways 1 and 2. You will not see a score there for usability. And that is the same for all grade levels. And also, if you want to scroll up and go over to high school, you have to go, if you scroll up just a little bit, there you go. And you can see, as Tim alluded to before, instead of grade level, it's by series. So I'll take a pause here and see if there are any questions just about the dots, about the gateways, and how to read those compare reports. You can actually create some custom comparisons. April, just above usability, yep. You can click on, perhaps your district is considering Agile Mind, Big Ideas Integrated, and Carnegie Integrated. You can compare those sets and see that Agile Mind received meet expectations in all 3 gateways. Big Ideas was only reviewed for Gateway 1 because it did not meet expectations in Gateway 1. And Carnegie Integrated met expectations in, or partially met expectations in Gateways 1 and 2, but therefore was not reviewed for Gateway 3. And there are various ways to create these custom comparisons. And if you go to materials under review, you can also see those that we're currently looking at. Great. I'd love to take you up to resources. If you'll pull down to downloadable resources or tools and evidence guides, actually, we can go to tools and evidence guides too. Everything you're always gonna find those things on the left-hand side, even if you go to a different page. So go to tools and evidence guides. There we go. Quality instructional materials tool for K-8 math. And here is the tool that our reviewers use when reviewing. So we'll pause right here. Here's a picture of the gateways that we've talked about. And then if you scroll through, you can see the rubrics that are used for scoring. And when reviewers are going through these materials, they're looking at both this tool and, April, if you want to pull up the evidence guides as well so we can kind of look at them. There we go. And the evidence guides. So this is where reviewers really get into the nitty-gritty. There are questions for each indicator. So for example, this particular criterion is, does at least 65% of instructional time address the major work of the grade? What is the purpose of this indicator? what should you be considering or collecting when you're looking for evidence. And the reason I show you these, both the rubrics and the evidence guides, is so when we go to look at a report, which we can do in just a second, you'll understand. If you want to go over to that original, that tab there, we'll go back to math, view math reports. Let's take a look at Zern. It just happens to be the first thing there, so we can look at show reports. So here's a summary of the alignment for first and second grade. You can see down at the bottom, we've got K2 there and 3-5 bands. This is just the overall. So if you're looking for high level, this is pretty high level. It was reviewed for all 3 gateways and met expectations for all 3 gateways. Let's click into the first grade report, sure. And this is what a report looks like. Again, there's the overall summary of alignment, then the summary for the gateways, summaries for the specific shifts, and then the criteria and indicator evidence. As you can see, if you'll scroll to criterion 1B, that was the criterion we just looked at in the evidence guide. They're looking for 65% of class time on the major works of the grade or major clusters of the grade. And it received 4 out of 4 points. And it gives very specific information here. 5 of the 6 missions include 1 or more major clusters of grade 1. Approximately 83% of the mission focus on major work of the grade. 33 of the 36 weeks of instruction are spent on major work of the grade for grade 1, or approximately 92% of the year. There are a total of 119 lessons, and approximately 103 of those lessons focus on the major work of the grade. So you can see that it gets very, very detailed. All right, let's move up to resources, back to resources, shall I say. And let's go to downloadable resources again. So in a minute, I'm going to talk through how you might use our reports in your work. If you have already begun the process for adoption, but might need some support in that, we have some guidance around beginning the adoption process and some steps to take in a really strong quality adoption process. If you are already implementing materials, let's say you made a major purchase last year or the year before, so you're a year or 2 into these materials and you know that you're probably not going to repurchase, you can use the Making the Most of Your Math and English Language Arts materials. This is kind of a step-by-step guide through ways to pinpoint gaps in the materials that you might need to bolster with professional learning, or perhaps there's a change up of a pacing calendar that might help better implement those materials. And we continue to add resources to the website consistently. If you go to, I believe it's About, scroll down, you are to Opportunities. We would love to have any of you who are interested and think that this would be something you might like to be a part of. There's a place for you to apply. Also, if you look over on the left, there's a Contact Us. This is where if you're using something that you'd like to see reviewed, you can tell us. Put your email in here, your name, and then let us know, hey, I would really like you to review, or have you considered reviewing ... Or you could write us a message that says, I love your reports. This is great. We use them all the time. We'd love to hear folks who are out in the field using the reports to help, whether it's their adoption process or the implementation process. So if there are no questions about the website, I'm going to jump back so that we make sure we end on time. April, are there any questions about the web?
Sorry, I had to find my mic button because I'm working on different screens and I'm navigating and watching. I see no further questions, but let's go ahead because I'm sure everyone was paying attention and listening. So we'll give them a a minute to kind of get a question in there, or they can feel free to unmute themselves. I think
Yes.
this is an amazing resource to use. It has way more information on it than I thought. I didn't realize it until actually I was contacted. You talked about how you're always looking to make things better. And as a state lead, I was contacted to collect feedback on how are we using it as a state, what kind of, there was an assessment of what did I know. And I had so much fun during that day because we were doing a Zoom, and she was like, well, tell me about this. And then, and she goes, so when you click on this, what do you see? And I was like, oh, I didn't know it did that, and I was so excited. And so then that's when I was like, well, if I don't know this, and, being at SCAS and even learning about it 3 times a year, because SCAS is where all of us state leads come together, and then partners come in to kind of coach us up so we can share with the state. So EdReports is one of those partners, and I spend 2 days with them 3 times a year. And I was like, because there's just so much information out there, right? And you don't know where to look, what's aligned, what's valuable, what's already honoring the work of the standards with student achievement partners and the shifts. And so when I kind of put all the pieces together, I was like, oh, I need to share this. I think others might care about this information and want to learn more.
Well, we're very glad you did.
Yes. So I just, I'm not seeing any questions.
Great.
So, yep.
Shall we move back to the PowerPoint?
Yes. Give me just a second. I might have
Yep.
to see if I can find the PowerPoint now. Okay.
Yay. You did it.
Yay. Great.
So let's look at, so slide 20 was kind of an overview of the website. Again, using EdReports, tools and evidence, it's all there. So let's go to slide 21. So we have some recommendations and an 8-step process for an adoption process that your district might engage in. Knowing where to use EdReports in your adoption process is helpful. We have a starting point data inventory, so you can really learn, do a needs assessment for your district. It's important also to identify the priorities, the parameters, and what your decision-making process is. So if you look on our website under the tools and evidence guides, we have some recommendations and some guidance there as well. You can use the reviews and the reports when you're looking at step 5, which is kind of winnowing those choices down. And then this is, Tim alluded to, when a green may not necessarily be all that it's cracked up to be. We really encourage folks to think first about alignment to the standards. We'd love for you to choose all greens, but knowing that all of those greens are not alike, and what capacities your stakeholders bring, what local priorities you might have, is helpful to know before you make a decision. And then creating a rollout and implementation plan, using those reports, using some of our resources to help really think through how we're going to roll this out. What is implementation going to look like beyond the day we sign a check and receive the materials? So EdReports can be helpful along this entire journey for you. If you are, we'll advance to slide 22. If you are using units of study that you have developed yourself, you can use those guides that we showed you, both the rubric, the tool, and the evidence guides, to really dig into those materials to make sure that they're aligned to the standards and the shifts. You might use them in a PLC or a grade level meeting or some kind of district professional learning opportunity where you choose a couple of indicators and really dig into those materials and make sure that they are as well aligned as you are hoping they are. Slide 23. If you are currently implementing a program or a textbook that you've recently adopted or downloaded or what have you, we know that not everything is going to be perfectly matched to meet your students' needs. Sometimes I have a little slide in here with Cinderella's glass slipper. It doesn't exist. We all know that the perfect set of materials doesn't exist. So if you're using something that might have some gaps or issues, making the most of your materials guiding documents can help pinpoint where the strengths and gaps are in your materials. A lot of times we have districts who have chosen something before they realized that EdReports existed and then found the report, and the report showed some areas of strength and some areas that weren't so strong. And we want to make sure that districts and teachers understand that we don't want to get in the way of the strengths, because sometimes we accidentally in our work diminish what the good parts, right? And forget about the gaps. So we want to make sure that you see both the strengths and the gaps in the materials you're using. It can help develop any guidance tools or pacing calendars or curricular supports that you might be developing. And then honestly, it will highlight some areas for professional learning opportunities and where perhaps some supplementing might need to be added or things might need to be omitted.
Shanna,
Yep.
did receive a question on this, and this is also available for ELA.
It is, yes.
And so then with science coming in a couple of months, eventually we'll have it for science.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I think that answered the question I received.
Great. So if you'd like to move on to the next slide. This is just some those that have gone before you in this adopting world. The success that we've had with districts who've had really successful, high quality adoption processes have engaged teachers and stakeholders from the beginning, including teachers in the winnowing process using EdReports. We've had lots of districts who've used our reports and reviews to kind of develop a rubric or criteria for evaluating your pilot using the IMET or the EQUIP rubrics as well. We have a couple of districts out here in California that I've been working with, had an amazing adoption recently. They adopted both ELA and math at the same time, which is crazy. But because they had such a great process that included teachers from the beginning, and they used the IMET, they used our review language in their pilot rubric, they ended up with really amazing materials and great buy-in from the folks who were going to be using the materials. Make sure that you're planning your rollout and your implementation strategies before you sign the check, and making sure that you have support from the publishers in professional learning other than the one-day institute. And how are you going to provide that ongoing professional learning with the materials? I love this question. How are you going to make the materials come to life for your students? So thinking about those things before you adopt is something that we've seen in really, really successful adoptions. And with that, we have finished with 6 minutes to spare for Q&A. So I'll pause here.
Great. And we'll go ahead and let people put some things in the chat. Some other things that you mentioned with using that publisher's criteria. Really glad to see that you're using that, because as I said, we just had our webinar about rigor, and the publisher's criteria helps us so much with the rigor and really looking at those 3 different aspects of rigor, being conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and application. And really, this is where we can get into some of those reports and use that information to increase the rigor. We took a little survey of the educators that were on, and many said that they felt like they had procedural fluency and lots of application, even if they were contrived application, but they didn't have that conceptual understanding. So I just love that there's the evidence there and that support there that we can use to make our resources better. We don't have to feel like, oh, if only April would have told us about this 6 months ago. So that's there, and we can continue to use that and improve it. And we don't have to feel like if we did just do a purchase that we have to throw the baby out with the bath. We can, add some more warm water and still make it a great curriculum for our students to have those standards being implemented under the shifts like we like it. I'm really super excited about the question that Open Up is being reviewed. It looks like that report's coming out in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So that's right around the time we'll have our SCAS too. So that's exciting to know, because we do have over 30 schools using that resource right now. So that's exciting. And I think we have some coming in on the high school pilot, which will then get them to be able to be into the next pilot. So that's exciting. So are you well, probably not. You probably won't review the high school for probably until next year or the year after, right? Because they're still writing it now.
That is correct. We won't be able to review until after they have finished their pilot and are actually making it available to all. That's when we're able to get to it and be able to review it as well.
Okay, so we're in 2018 now, so it'll go full.
I think it might be fall of 2019, because I believe they're going to do their pilot starting in the fall of this year, so fall of 2018, and then have it widely available the next year.
Okay,
that's next school year.
Okay, awesome.
I think.
Really exciting that you're doing the science also. I'll be sure to share that with the science lead at the DE also, because that's, another tool that we'll have. I think one last question. You talked about this a little bit. What about the assessments? Because right now we're still in the process of getting a statewide assessment that's aligned to the standards. As far as the assessments, if a resource is green, and as an educator, as a teacher, can I feel confident that using these assessments I'm on the right track with my students? So not just the instructional piece, but also the tests that are the assessments, the quizzes, the formative checks, those will all be in alignment also?
So in our K-8 tool, indicator 1A looks at if the materials are assessing grade, are the assessments on grade level. Then in Gateway 3, we have one of the rating sheets is, and this is for both kindergarten or K through 8 and high school. There is a rating sheet about assessments where we look at, are they giving alignment to standards? Are they providing rubrics and scoring guidance and feedback on and support for teachers on how to provide feedback to students? So in rating sheet 3, we kind of take a deeper look. Rating sheet 3 of Gateway 3, we take a deeper look at the assessments. Now, what we do throughout all of the review, though, in Gateways 1 and 2, aside from talking about grade level topics at the beginning of Gateway 1, we include the assessments as any other part of the materials. So if the assessments were to not be aligned to standards, if they weren't connected to the lessons of the materials, that would come out in the reviews. It could come out in different places in Gateways 1 and 2. And we even a lot of times will reference assessment items as evidence for perhaps different aspects of rigor, where the assessment items that are focusing on conceptual understanding or application or developing procedural skills and fluencies. So that's how we handle assessments as a part of the materials.
Okay, great. That makes sense. Thank you for explaining that.
Okay.
So I did advance to the slide that gives your email information, and we are at 11 o'clock. So I want to thank everyone for their time, and thank you for having a great chat around this information. And my ask of all of you online would be to share this with your colleagues. We'll send out the slide deck, we'll send out the recording, tell others about this resource and how it might help them to inform those instructional decisions around adoption or adaptation to their current materials. I cannot thank Tim and Shanna enough from Iowa. Thank you so much. And everyone have a great rest of your day and stay warm.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.